The initial notion of letting Singapore rescue Denmark was simply unbelievable. How could an island nation in distant Southeast Asia, a region even the mighty United States and Europe found challenging, possibly succeed? We were convinced they stood no chance of success. Yet, barely 3 days later, everything changed. Please help Denmark. We offer everything. Unconditionally. What truly happened? How did an island nation, just beginning its story, completely overturn the Arctic strategies of the world's most powerful nations? Good morning, everyone. I am Frederick Jensen, a foreign and intelligence officer at Denmark's Ministry of Defense. I stand before you today to confess, candidly, that I need to unburden myself. Diplomats are told not to show emotion, but recalling the events of these past few months, I cannot help but draw a deep breath and let out a sigh, because I have personally felt how small Denmark truly is, and how powerless this little ship was against such colossal waves. But, let me tell you, amidst that raging storm, an unexpected hand reached out. When I first heard the name Singapore, I admit, I had no strong feelings. Singapore, the country known for its semiconductors, vibrant hawker culture, and meticulously planned cityscape. My daughter's favorite animated series seemed to have some connection to them, and my knowledge ended there. However, it was then that US President Trump, during a press conference, brought up the detestable matter of Greenland. Initially, I thought it was a joke. Similar remarks had surfaced years ago, and even our Prime Minister at the time had merely offered a helpless smile, with the world's media treating it as a minor sideshow. But this time, the atmosphere was different. An official note flew in from the US State Department, delivered through formal diplomatic channels. Its content: the two nations needed to engage in in-depth discussions about Greenland's strategic value. While the word purchase was not used, the intent of the note was painfully obvious. Our Ministry of Foreign Affairs was thrown into chaos, like a stirred beehive. It would not be an exaggeration to say that all of Copenhagen was shaken. That evening, I received an urgent briefing at the Ministry of Defense building. The intelligence analyst projected a map onto the screen and began explaining the value of Arctic sea lanes, their military importance, and a series of figures. They said Greenland's underground rare earth reserves were enough to meet the world's demand. I asked, why is the US pushing this now? The analyst replied, with China dominating the rare earth market, the US needs an alternative. Greenland could be their ace in the hole. Ah, so our land is merely a pawn on the chessboard of great powers? I muttered, no one responding. Silence was consent. Days later, the situation grew even more complex. We received intelligence that a consortium of American energy companies was bypassing our central government and directly approaching Greenland's autonomous government. Although Greenland is Danish territory, it possesses extensive self-governance. The US shrewdly exploited this loophole. Their proposal offered exclusive rights to explore and extract rare earths, hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure, investment, and local job creation. For Greenland, these were dream-come-true conditions. Foreign Minister Rasmussen summoned me. Walking into his office, winter sunlight streamed through the window, but the minister's expression was colder than the Arctic ice. Jensen, what's your take? Minister, if Greenland's autonomous government accepts the US proposal, we have no legal means to stop them. Legally, only foreign policy and defense fall under our jurisdiction. The minister sighed deeply. That's precisely the problem. The US knows this inside out. I cautiously asked, can't we act at the EU level? The minister shook his head. Do you think the EU will directly confront the United States? Germany and France will ultimately prioritize their national interests. We are but a small nation of 6 million people. His words stung my heart. 6 million, less than half the population of a city like Singapore. This was our weight in the international community. Soon after, even more shocking news arrived. The US Department of Defense was pushing for the construction of a new military base in northern Greenland. They claimed the existing Thule Air Base was insufficient. They needed a large-scale facility capable of monitoring the entire Arctic Sea and, if necessary, containing Russia and China. It was less a negotiation and more a dictate. When the US negotiating team arrived in Copenhagen, their attitude was clear. We are not here to propose. We are here to confirm the schedule. Domestic public opinion began to split. Pro-US politicians claimed we should face reality. Denmark was powerless to defend Greenland alone, so entering the US nuclear umbrella was a wise move. On the other hand, angry voices erupted. Are we selling out our sovereignty? Are we a vassal state of the United States? Spontaneous demonstrations broke out in the streets. Thousands gathered in City Hall Square, chanting, "Greenland is our land! USA, go home!" The shouts echoed through the sky. I sat in my car, witnessing the scene. Among the protesters were people waving national flags, pro and anti-factions, shouting at each other. Our society was being torn apart. It was then that a report, compiled by British intelligence, landed in our hands. I cannot disclose how we obtained it, but its content was undeniably accurate. The title, Analysis of Denmark's Technological Vulnerabilities. As I read the report, I felt a deep sense of shame. Denmark lacked independent capabilities in cutting-edge technology. Semiconductors, batteries, communication equipment, everything was highly reliant on foreign sources. Especially in rare earth utilization technology, we had almost nothing. Even if we acquired raw materials, we were limited by our ability to apply them. In a nutshell, Denmark, even with Greenland, lacked the capability to harness its potential. This was a painful, undeniable truth. Even if we had rare earths, we lacked the technology to process them into products. The extracted ore would ultimately only be sold to China or the United States. This was the cruel reality. However, my gaze stopped at the end of the report. There was an item titled, Key Focus Subject. It listed the name of a country, Singapore. Singaporean companies were rapidly rising in rare earth processing technology and battery production capabilities. If Denmark collaborates with Singapore, it could become an unpredictable variable in the US's Greenland strategy. I reread that sentence multiple times. Singapore, that distant island nation, could be a variable for the United States. Honestly, at first, I couldn't believe it. How could Singapore intervene in this Arctic geopolitical game? But I quickly understood. What the US feared was not Singapore's military might or economic size, but its technology. Singapore's technology, semiconductor chip manufacturing, solid-state batteries, displays, communication equipment. In these fields, Singapore had already reached world-leading levels. More importantly, Singapore was building an independent supply chain that didn't rely on China. From the US perspective, Denmark cooperating with Singapore was an uncontrolled scenario, because Greenland's resources could potentially flow through a third route, one that was neither Chinese nor purely American. It was only then that I truly understood for the first time. Singapore was not a country that fought with weapons. It was a country that fought with something else, a diplomatic tool named technology, a quiet force that could shake the strategies of great powers without firing a single shot. Ladies and gentlemen, think about it. A nation of over 5 million people, listed as a key focus subject in the intelligence reports of the world's most powerful nation, the United States. And not as a threat, but as a variable. Do you know what this means? Singapore, unknowingly, was no longer a pawn on the chessboard but an entity capable of shaking the chessboard itself. That night, I returned home, unfolded a world map, and stared for a long time at the distance from Denmark to Singapore over 10,000 kilometers. Different cultures, different histories, never part of the same alliance system. A distant country that could influence our destiny. The world really had become smaller. No, technology had shrunk the world. I put down my glass and sank into deep thought. Perhaps we had a chance to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, and that key might lie in that eastern city-state. Of course, at that time I didn't yet know where this idea would lead, or in what form Singapore would appear before us. But one thing was certain. The map of the Arctic was being redrawn, and an unexpected name was about to be etched onto that map. Singapore. The next day, I received an urgent summons. An exclusive meeting, personally chaired by Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. Only 4 people were present: the Foreign Minister, the Defense Minister, and a few key officials, including myself. Walking into the meeting room, the Prime Minister's expression was extraordinary. Her usual calm and composed facade was gone, replaced by a sharp gaze of resolute determination. The Prime Minister began, "We have few cards left to play. US pressure is escalating. The EU is not our friend. Germany only cares about protecting its industries, and France has no interest in the Arctic at all." The ministers nodded heavily. This was an undeniable reality. The Prime Minister continued, "Precisely for this reason, I believe we must seek new partners. A third option? Neither American nor Chinese." I instantly knew the Prime Minister had reached the same conclusion. Sure enough, she spoke the name. I intend to send a proposal to Singapore. The content: joint development of Arctic infrastructure. establishing a technological cooperation system that enables us to process Greenland's resources with our own hands. Foreign Minister Rasmussen frowned. Singapore? A country completely unrelated to the Arctic? The Prime Minister countered. Precisely because it's unrelated, it's good. They won't have territorial ambitions. They won't demand land like the US, nor will they try to incorporate us into a political framework like China's Belt and Road Initiative. A pure exchange of technology and resources. Only Singapore can achieve this. Logically, it made sense, but I had a concern. Prime Minister, will Singapore accept our proposal? The Prime Minister looked at me, and I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. They must accept, because we have no other choice. In that moment, a strange emotion welled up in me. Denmark, a proud European kingdom, so desperately seeking help from a distant Asian island nation, the world had truly changed. The proposal was dispatched with the utmost speed. The Danish ambassador in Singapore flew to meet directly with Singapore's Deputy Secretary for Foreign Affairs. Documents were transmitted, encrypted, and the meeting content left no official record, for we needed to evade the eyes of US intelligence. We waited for a reply. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. However, an unexpected incident erupted. A past report resurfaced in Danish domestic media. It was from 2019, an interview where a Danish Minister for Industry and Commerce mentioned Singapore. The report's title, Singapore, a nation skilled at imitating technology. I stared at the report, unable to suppress my anger. Why now, of all times, dredge up something like this? The report's content was even more caustic. The minister at the time had said, Singaporean companies grew by imitating European technology. True innovation still originates from Europe and the United States. It was an outdated remark, but the context didn't matter. This article, once translated, began to spread through Singaporean online communities. In just 1 day, it reached hundreds of thousands of views. The comment section exploded. Denmark? What are they talking about? A country that can't even use computers without our chips. If they need help, go ask the US. I looked at the Singaporean portal sites and sighed deeply. This was completely a headwind. Just as we reached out our hand, past insults caught at our ankles. The more serious problem was that public opinion within Singapore began to subtly divide. Our intelligence agency analyzed the trends in Singaporean media and submitted a report. The situation was extremely complex. On one hand, voices emerged. No need to help Denmark. How did they treat us when they were arrogant? Remember? Europeans always look down on Asians. Now it's their time to pay. This emotional reaction was entirely understandable. Honestly, if it were me, I might think the same. Someone who usually ignores you suddenly comes asking for help. It's hard to willingly extend a hand. But the opposing view was also strong. This is an opportunity. A stage to showcase Singapore's technological prowess to the world. We cannot be swayed by emotions and miss a strategic opportunity. If we help Denmark, the entire European perspective on Singapore will change. The two opinions clashed fiercely. It was said that even the Singaporean parliament began to discuss the issue. I read the report and thought, Singapore, what a curious nation. A country capable of such fierce debate between emotion and strategy must not be underestimated. Days later, the official reply from Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs arrived. I read it with the foreign minister in his office. Minister Rasmussen unfolded the document, tracing each word with his finger. The gist was as follows. The Singaporean government has reviewed the Kingdom of Denmark's proposal. Joint development of Arctic infrastructure is a venture that could benefit both nations. However, further discussions are needed regarding the terms and scope of cooperation. We first suggest holding working-level consultations. The minister shook his head, puzzled. This isn't a rejection, but it's not a commitment either. I tried to keep my composure. Singapore has opened the door for us, but they haven't handed us the initiative. Instead, it feels like they intend to lead the entire game. Further discussions regarding the terms and scope, that was the core meaning. It meant, it's not about what you want, it's about what you can bring to the table. Let us see first, I muttered. Is this fair? We are the ones seeking help, yet it feels like we are being tested. The minister smiled wryly. The world has changed. We used to be the providers. Those words echoed in my mind. We used to be the strong ones. Europe taught Asia, offered aid, presented models of development. The era of advanced nations, looking down on developing ones. But now, Singapore was no longer a country learning. They had ascended to the position of teacher. and they held the power to decide to whom they would teach and what they would teach. Technology is power. I now understood the meaning of this statement from the depths of my being. Ladies and gentlemen, consider this. Just 75 years ago, Singapore was recovering from the ravages of war. At that time, European nations had to send aid supplies. Denmark too had dispatched medical teams and resources. Who could have imagined then that that nation would become what it is today? Now, Singapore stood in a position to decide whether to provide technology to an advanced European nation. A country that once struggled in ruins had its international standing reversed, becoming a crucial global player. I lay awake that night. Should this be called historical irony or just reward? One thing was certain. Singapore was not a country driven by emotion. They could have closed the door due to past insults, but they made a strategic judgment. Is the aid valuable? What can be gained after providing aid? They performed a cold calculation. I realized this was the true demeanor of a great nation. Weak nations are led by emotion, angered by disrespect, pleased by praise. But strong nations are different. They put emotion aside and prioritize national interest. Singapore was precisely like this. The date for the working-level consultations was set. The location, Singapore. We needed to go. The foreign minister included me in the delegation. Jensen, you go. The possibility of cooperation at the Ministry of Defense level also needs to be discussed. I nodded my acknowledgement. As I boarded the flight from Copenhagen to Singapore, I thought, this journey might change the fate of Denmark. No, perhaps fate has already begun to change. Outside the window, Denmark's plains receded. Far away lay Greenland, the Arctic Sea, a battleground where the desires of great powers clashed, and I was now about to introduce a new variable into this battleground. 12 hours later, we would arrive at Changi Airport. How would Singapore greet us? As a friend or as a judge? Honestly, I didn't know. After returning from Singapore, I was plagued by jet lag for days. But even more difficult to adjust to than my body was my mind. What I saw, heard, and felt in Singapore intertwined complexly, impossible to organize. Their technological prowess, their self-confidence, and most importantly, their attitude, everything, exceeded my expectations. I had to submit a report to the Prime Minister's office. As I organized Singapore's proposed cooperation terms and the considerations we needed to address into a document, my hands even trembled. Because Singapore's hand was far greater than we had imagined. They weren't just offering to sell technology. They were talking about transplanting an entire system. Singapore's resource management system, climate adaptation infrastructure, and the data platform connecting it all. They proposed an integrated solution optimized for Greenland. Honestly, at first, I thought it was an exaggeration. No matter how good Singapore's technology, how could it function normally in the extreme environment of the Arctic Circle? This was a field where even European companies had failed. However, when I saw the data they provided, my opinion completely changed. Singapore already had experience with pilot projects in northern Canada and Norway's Svalbard archipelago, solid-state energy storage systems operating at -40 degrees Celsius, communication infrastructure that could be maintained in blizzards and glacial conditions. All the data was complete. In the conclusion of my report, I wrote, Singapore's proposal holds significant value and warrants consideration. However, domestic political consensus must first be achieved. That last sentence became the problem. Denmark's upper and lower houses erupted in uproar. Singapore's system integration proposal was presented, and political parties on both sides immediately clashed. Proponents and opponents fiercely debated. The proponents' argument was clear. We have no other choice. To withstand US pressure, we need independent technological strength. Cooperation with Singapore is the fastest way to secure this. The opponent's logic also had some merit. Is it fair to entrust core infrastructure to an Asian nation? We should seek solutions within the EU. Reliance will only create another dependent relationship. Parliamentary hearings were held, and I attended as a witness. An opposition MP stared at me and asked, Officer Jensen, is Singapore truly a trustworthy partner? Can you confirm their technology isn't derived from mainland China? I felt a surge of irritation. What was this person talking about? The MP held up a tablet, its screen displaying an article from an unknown online media outlet. The title, The Unspeakable Origins of Singaporean Technology, the Guise of Chinese OEM. I sighed deeply in my mind. These conspiracy theories had infiltrated to this extent. This article had been circulating online in Denmark for days. It claimed that Singapore's semiconductor and battery technologies were actually stolen from mainland China, citing anonymous whistleblowers and several unidentified documents as evidence of imitation. This was an absurd conspiracy theory, but we couldn't ignore it, because a segment of the public believed the article to be true. I answered clearly into the microphone, "Honorable member, the content of that article is inconsistent with the facts. Singapore's semiconductor technology, from companies like TSMC, self-correction, change TSMC to a plausible Singaporean equivalent, or remove specific company names to avoid direct factual inaccuracy within the fictional context." Okay. I will generalize to leading Singaporean tech firms has been developed through decades of independent research, blood, and sweat. Conversely, in recent years, it is mainland China that has been desperately imitating Singapore's technology. This claim is untenable. The MP scoffed. "That is your opinion. We need independent verification," I patiently responded. "Then let us proceed with verification. The Singaporean side has proposed a technology demonstration. You will be able to make your own judgment after seeing it with your own eyes." The technology demonstration was held 2 weeks later at the Copenhagen University of Technology Auditorium. Experts from Denmark, Germany, and Norway were invited to attend. From Singapore, Dr. Chen Wei from the Green Energy Technology Research Institute came as the presenter. I sat in the front row, watching the presentation. Dr. Chen Wei was not tall, but his gaze was as sharp as a blade. He announced that he would deliver his presentation in fluent English, no translation needed. It was less English and more an engineer's language, numbers, graphs, and data. The presentation began. The first slide showed a performance comparison of battery energy storage systems from 3 countries, German-made, US-made, and Singaporean-made. The conditions were identical, -35 degrees Celsius, wind speed 25 meters per second, humidity 95%, the extreme environment of a Nordic winter. When the results appeared on the screen, the auditorium erupted in gasps. German-made. Efficiency dropped 30% after 48 hours. US-made. Charging failure occurred after 72 hours. Singaporean-made. Maintained 98% efficiency after 120 hours. Dr. Chen Wei calmly stated, "This is reality. The most stable system operating under Nordic climate conditions is Singapore's. If you have any questions, please verify the data directly." I stole a glance at the German technical officer sitting next to me. His expression was rigid, like a mask, an expression of unwilling belief yet compelled acknowledgement. My feelings were similar. Honestly, this was completely beyond my expectations. We had thought it was just small-scale research, but Singapore had presented something on a different dimension. The engineer switched to the next slide, displaying the floor plan of a floating facility. Please look at the underwater structure. It includes a data center connected to submarine cables, rare earth processing facilities, and emergency shelter modules. In extreme situations, it can sustain 200 people autonomously for 30 days. I couldn't help but whisper, "This isn't just a facility, it's a fortress." Dr. Chen Wei replied, "You can call it a fortress, but it's a fortress that doesn't use a single bullet." It was only days later that this design plan leaked to the outside world. The US Department of Defense issued an official statement, the content of which was astonishing. Singapore's proposed Arctic infrastructure design for Denmark is a strategic weapon disguised as a civilian facility. If this facility is built, the entire Arctic Sea region's power grid and communication networks will face the risk of being subjugated by Singaporean technology. I read this statement and couldn't help but smile wryly. What the US truly feared was exposed. Singapore's floating base was not a warship, nor a missile, but the US called it a strategic weapon, because whoever controls electricity, fresh water, and data, even without guns, can dominate the region. All ships operating in the Arctic Sea, all research bases, all extraction facilities would rely on this floating base. Who provides power? Who supplies water? Who operates the communication network? This is true power. Singapore knew this. No, they designed it with this in mind. I called Deputy Secretary Lim. The US is opposing. Did you anticipate this? On the phone, Deputy Secretary Lim's calm voice came through. As anticipated. In fact, their reaction was a bit slow. How do you plan to respond? No need to respond. We merely proposed building a civilian facility. Calling it a weapon is the US's interpretation, not a fact. I was speechless. Was this Singapore's jiu-jitsu? Not to directly confront, but to let the opponent overreact themselves, like a martial artist using the opponent's strength to fell them. A country that fights with technology. A country that wages war with data, not bullets. Singapore was waging a new form of warfare. It was then that unexpected reinforcements arrived. Greenlandic community groups issued a joint statement. The content was as follows. We, the residents and community associations of Greenland, collectively support the introduction of Singaporean infrastructure. US military bases will only turn our land into a battlefield. In contrast, Singapore's proposal will provide employment, energy, and clean water for our residents. We don't want tanks. We want power stations. I read this statement 3 times. Honestly, I was moved. The residents of Greenland had spoken for themselves. Before politicians in Copenhagen made their decisions, the local people had already chosen. Do you know what this means, ladies and gentlemen? Singapore's design proposal was not only technically superior, it won hearts, because they understood the residents' needs and designed towards fulfilling them. The US viewed Greenland as a military stronghold. China viewed it as a resource warehouse. But Singapore was different. Singapore viewed Greenland as a place where people lived. This difference determined the outcome. I subsequently visited Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, to meet with representatives of community groups. Upon arrival at the airport, a biting cold struck me, -25 degrees Celsius. Each breath felt like my lungs would freeze. The meeting was held in a small community center in the city. The heating was inadequate. Magnus Holm, the community group representative, greeted me. A man in his 50s, his face etched with deep wrinkles, the face of a man who had spent a lifetime braving the Arctic winds. He said, "Officer Jensen, do you know why we chose Singapore?" I replied, "Isn't it because of their technological prowess?" Magnus shook his head. "No, it's because they came and asked us." Asked? Yes. When Singapore's technical team came here, their first question was, "What do you need most?" The Americans never asked such questions. They only said, "This place is strategically important. We will build a base." That was all. I felt a warmth in my chest. Magnus continued, "We are a small people, only 50,000 strong. We are always swaying between great powers. But Singaporeans treated us as equal partners. That's what matters most." I looked out the window. Under the gray sky, ice and snow stretched endlessly. The people living in this harsh land, what they needed was not weapons, but dignity. Singapore understood this. On the plane back, I gazed out the window, lost in thought. Below the clouds was the Arctic Sea, dotted with white icebergs. Vast resources lay dormant somewhere, and great powers were silently vying for them. But I had an epiphany that day. The true victors are not those who hold guns, but those who win hearts. Singapore did not send a single warship, not a single soldier, but they won the hearts of Greenland's residents. Is that not more powerful than any military force? Security without tanks, power without missiles. Singapore proved it was possible. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes. Though exhausted, my heart was unexpectedly calm, because I was confident we had made the right choice. Greenland's heart would henceforth beat powered by Singaporean technology, and the sound of that beat would reverberate throughout the world. No matter what the US said, what China said, it no longer mattered, because, on the chessboard, a new history had begun. When technology is stronger than military might, the world changes. We were in the midst of that change. Before the official construction of the floating base, Singapore first proposed a suggestion, a pilot run. Choose a small village in Greenland, install Singaporean energy systems, and let the residents experience it directly. I was initially puzzled. Was this truly necessary? The technology was proven, the data available, and experts had acknowledged it. But Deputy Secretary Lim explained, "Officer Jensen, technology is not proven by numbers, it's proven by people's fingertips. True success is when residents actually use it and feel good about it." I nodded profoundly. He had a point. Even the best technology is useless if the local people don't accept it. The village chosen for the pilot project was Ilulissat, in eastern Greenland, a small fishing village of just over 500 people, also famous for its spectacular calving glaciers. Singapore's technical team arrived and began installation. Solar panels, small wind turbines, and household energy storage devices. In just 1 week, the entire village's system was complete. On the first day of the pilot operation, I witnessed it firsthand. In the evening, after sunset, the temperature plummeted to nearly -30 degrees Celsius. Normally, The diesel generator would start up at this time. However, the lights in the village came on, quietly, naturally. There was no roar of the diesel engine. A resident walked out of his house and looked up at the sky. A man in his 60s, his face filled with an expression of disbelief. He whispered, "No sound." Truly, no sound. I heard his words through the translator. It was said that this village had relied on diesel generators for decades, falling asleep every night to their loud noise, never experiencing a silent night. That evening, murmurs began to spread among the villagers. Social media posts appeared, initially in the local Greenlandic language, but quickly translated into English and Danish, spreading widely. The viewership exploded. The posts read, "Tonight for the first time, I slept without the noise of a generator, thanks to Singaporean technology. Our children can experience a quiet night. Thank you, Singapore." The hashtags were number Silent Night Singapore and number Greenland Miracle. In just 2 days, the readership exceeded 500,000, with comments pouring in from across Europe, mostly positive responses. I scrolled through the posts, thinking, this is what happens when technology meets life. This was a reaction that numbers and graphs could never create a force that moved hearts. Days later, Danish national television contacted me. They wanted to produce a documentary titled The Human Face of Southeast Asian Technology. I readily agreed to cooperate. The film crew flew to Greenland and interviewed the villagers. The documentary aired 3 weeks later. I sat on the sofa in my living room, watching the program with my wife. The documentary began with scenes of Greenland's landscape glaciers, the ocean, and the small village. The voiceover began, "Technology from Southeast Asia has arrived in a small village in the Arctic Circle. It's not just machinery, it's a tool that changes lives." The scene shifted, showing the daily lives of the villagers, waking up in the morning, turning on the lights, warming their homes with electric heaters. Children doing homework in warm rooms. A mother in an interview said, "Before, the smell of diesel would drift into the house, and the children often coughed. Now the air is clean, and the children cough less." I watched the screen, choked with emotion. The value of technology was to reduce a child's cough. This was true success. In the middle part of the documentary, an unexpected scene appeared. Archival footage about Singapore's past, black and white images from the late 1960s, early days of nation-building Singapore. Power outages were common. An elderly Singaporean woman, in her 80s, appeared in an interview. Her face was full of wrinkles, but her eyes sparkled like a young girl's. The old woman said, "Back then, electricity was very precious. At night, we lit kerosene lamps. The family gathered around, listening to the radio. That was our only joy." The screen flashed through old photographs. A family huddled together under a kerosene lamp, children leaning in to listen to a small radio. The old woman continued, "Young people today don't know, how important electricity is. You just flip a switch, and the light comes on. That's not something to be taken for granted. That was built by our generation, step by step, with sweat." I watched this scene, my eyes welling up. I secretly glanced at my wife next to me. She was also wiping away tears. Ladies and gentlemen, do you understand what this means? Singapore's technology did not appear out of thin air. It was born from a history of hardship. Those who listened to the radio under kerosene lamps, those generations who endured power outages and poverty, they created this technology. That's why Singaporeans understand the preciousness of energy. That dedication to not wasting a single watt of electricity is an attitude only those who have experienced poverty can possess. Technology is not born in research labs. It is born from empathy. That night, I understood this truth. The latter half of the documentary introduced another case study, a small fishing village on Singapore's southern coast. The content was about this village's world-leading recycling rate of discarded fishing nets and plastics, nearly 100%. At first, I didn't understand. Fishing nets and plastics? What was so special? But after hearing the explanation, my mind changed. In fishing villages, discarded fishing nets and plastics are necessities. Fish crates, aquaculture materials, the consumption is enormous. The problem is, they flow into the ocean, becoming a major source of marine pollution. This is a global challenge. However, this small fishing village in Singapore almost completely recycled its waste plastics. How did they do it? Residents manually washed, sorted, and delivered them to recycling centers. Not by machines, but by human hands. Elderly people came out in the early morning to wash, dry, and sort the plastics. An old man, interviewed, said, If you throw it away, it's trash. If you pick it up, it's a resource. We can't let it float in our sea. This is something that can be solved with a little hard work. I was profoundly struck by this sentence. This is something that can be solved with a little hard work. What a simple yet noble philosophy. In Europe, to solve such problems, we would invest tens of billions in budgets, develop machines, formulate policies, introduce regulations, and spend tax money. Even then, the results were often meager. Yet, this small fishing village in Singapore simply did it silently. No regulations, no policies, just relying on human hands and hearts. The documentary's narrator described it as the spirit of "nothing is wasted." I believe this expression captured the essence. After the documentary ended, my wife asked me, "Do you think Singapore has always been like this?" I replied, "No, I didn't know before. I only learned recently." My wife shook her head. "We've been living too ignorantly, always thinking Asian countries were all the same. But Singapore is different." I deeply agreed. Honestly, Europeans tend to generalize. Asia, China, Singapore, Korea, Vietnam, all seem similar. But when you truly look at Singapore, you discover a completely different world. A culture that has experienced hardship, remembered poverty, and therefore detests waste, pursues efficiency, and values utility. This is the foundation of Singaporean technology. It is not about glamorous specifications or cutting-edge equipment. It is simply about life, a technology born from people's lives. Precisely for this reason, the residents of Greenland also accepted it. Singaporean technology carries the scent of life. It doesn't have the cold touch of machinery, but the warm touch of humanity. Technology, ultimately, serves people. Singapore has not forgotten this obvious truth. After the documentary aired, public opinion within Denmark completely shifted. The negative perceptions of Singaporean technology vanished like smoke. The media's conspiracy theories also lost their power, because people had seen with their own eyes the smiles of Greenland's residents, the tears of the elderly Singaporean woman, and the rough hands of the fishing village elders. In that moment, I had an epiphany. Some things politics and diplomacy cannot change. Some hearts, statistics, and data cannot persuade. But stories are different. Human stories can move other human hearts. Singapore knew this. They didn't just sell technology, they conveyed stories, weaving together past hardships, current achievements, and future visions. This was true soft power. I sat at my desk, looking out the window. Copenhagen's winter sky was grey, but my heart was suddenly clear. We had found the right partner. This certainty grew even stronger. Singapore, this nation, their technology permeated with the scent of life, and this scent could move people more deeply than any perfume. The American counterattack was faster than expected. Shortly after the Greenland project officially launched, ominous news began to emanate from Washington. Initially, there were small signs. The U.S. Treasury Department announced it would conduct precise audits of Singaporean companies' transactions with the U.S. Then came news that the U.S. Patent Office demanded a re-examination of the original patents for Singaporean energy technologies. I heard these reports and sighed deeply. The economic war had begun. Though no shots were fired, this too was war, a war waged with patents and economic pressure. The aim was clear: to force Singapore to withdraw from the Greenland project by pressuring them. I called Deputy Secretary Lim. "The U.S. has started to act. Do you have a countermeasure?" There was silence on the other end. Then Deputy Secretary Lim's voice came through. "Don't worry, Officer Jensen, we are also prepared." From his tone, I sensed a peculiar confidence. Was there truly a secret? "What do you mean?" "You'll see soon enough." Days later, Singapore held a press conference. The main presenter was a small venture capital firm, Green Tech Innovations. I had never heard the name before. It was said to be a startup with fewer than 50 employees. However, their announcement shocked the world. Small Modular Reactor, SMR, technology had received certification from the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. I watched the screen, barely believing my eyes. A 50-person startup had developed SMR technology? At the press conference, the company's representative said, "The U.S. side has consistently claimed that our technology is stolen. However, we have obtained official certification from the IAEA, passing the world's most stringent verification processes. This certification proves the originality of our technology." The representative held up the certification document. Camera flashes erupted like gunfire. The U.S. patent offensive was instantly diffused. How could you claim technology officially recognized by an international body was stolen? The US Patent Office's demand for re-examination became moot. The Treasury Department's pressure also lost most of its effectiveness. I watched the press conference, dumbfounded. Singapore had anticipated this from the very beginning, anticipated that the US would launch a patent offensive and prepared international certification in advance. This was their shield. If this were a game of chess, they had predicted at least 4 or 5 moves ahead. What kind of country were these people? I asked myself. Worldwide interest in this venture capital firm exploded. How could a small startup develop SMR technology? Media outlets from around the globe clamored for interviews. I, too, was curious and requested a visit to Singapore's Research Institute. "You are invited to our Research Institute in Jurong Island," came the reply. I flew to Singapore, then took a taxi to the location. Outside the window, Singapore's landscape flashed by urban greenery, modern high-rises, a scenery completely different from continental Europe. Upon arriving at the Research Institute, my first impression, honestly, was disappointment. Contrary to my expectations of a gleaming, state-of-the-art building, it was an old factory-style building. Paint was peeling from the exterior walls, and cracks spider-webbed across the asphalt in the parking lot. The research guide seemed to read my expression, smiling. "Officer Jensen, the exterior might look a bit worn, but you'll change your mind once you go inside." The interior of the institute was like a battlefield. No, battlefield wasn't enough. It was a survival site. Walking through the corridors, staff members rushed back and forth, their faces generally flushed. Some were eating instant noodles standing in the hallway. Others were leaning against walls, eyes closed, catching quick naps. The research guide explained, "We once worked for 72 consecutive hours for this project. To meet the international certification review schedule, we had no choice." 72 hours? I was shocked. 3 straight days without sleep? Yes. We slept in shifts. At that time, there was also a problem with external power supply. We relied on our own generators. And diesel fuel isn't cheap. I stopped. "Your own generators?" The researcher nodded. "Yes. At the time, there were temporary power instabilities in the region. We couldn't take any risks, so we had to activate backup generators." I was speechless. What was this? Was this what an advanced nations research institute looked like? It was more like a temporary shelter in a makeshift bunker. Yet, it was from this bunker that the world's most cutting-edge SMR technology was born. The researcher calmly said, "Officer Jensen, Singapore's technology is not born in carefully curated environments. It's born from urgency. It's created by people who gritted their teeth and persevered through life or death situations." His words pierced my heart. As the Research Institute tour concluded, preparing to leave, the guide told me one more thing. "Officer Jensen, do you know about the ancient strategist who meticulously managed logistics?" I shook my head. "Only by name." The researcher smiled. "During a period of great upheaval, there was a strategist known as a genius of logistics. Recent interesting research analyzed his surviving letters and found extremely detailed records of quantity management. How many arrows, how much gunpowder, how much food, how much rice, all resources were digitally recorded and managed." I became interested. A general from 400 years ago doing logistics management? Yes, just like modern Excel spreadsheets. To win a battle, you can't just rely on brandishing a sword. You must accurately manage and distribute resources behind the scenes. This strategist practiced that 400 years ago. I suddenly understood. Strategy begins with Excel? Is that what you mean? The researcher nodded. In Singapore's tech community, this spirit is being re-evaluated. Our ancestors didn't romanticize technology. They managed everything with ironclad numbers. This spirit has been passed down to this day. I was deeply convinced. Singapore's technological prowess does not solely come from cleverness. It is the result of centuries of accumulated survival experience, lessons learned from disasters and adversities. When resources are scarce, one must precisely calculate and efficiently utilize. This realization has been inherited like DNA. On the high-speed train back to Singapore, I gazed out the window, lost in thought. Where did this nation, Singapore, get its foundation? In Europe, we view technology from an investment perspective. Invest capital and results will follow, improve facilities, and innovation will occur. That's how we think. But Singapore is different. For them, technological R&D is a matter of survival. If they don't do it, they die. If they don't keep up, they get eliminated. It is this sense of urgency that enables them to work for 72 consecutive hours to activate generators even during power outages. This isn't overtime. This is a life and death struggle. It was only then that I understood why Singapore's research institutes looked so unassuming. They didn't spend money on decorating buildings. All resources were focused solely on technological R&D. While the exterior might seem shabby, the results produced were world-class. This isn't meticulous craftsmanship. This is a blueprint forged from the fires of necessity. This is the very essence of Singaporean technology. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a good sword. Where is it forged? Not in a comfortable living room. It is hammered thousands of times by a blacksmith next to a simple furnace, tempered in intense fire. Singapore's technology is also like this, born from the trauma of post-war struggles, the pain of poverty, and the pressure of great powers. That sword gleams with a chilling light because it has been sharpened over decades. The reason the US fears this sword lies here. Singapore's technology is not built with money. It is built with blood, sweat, and tears. Can such technology be defeated by patent lawsuits? Impossible. Upon returning to Copenhagen after visiting the Research Institute, I submitted my report to the Prime Minister. The conclusion of the report was, Singapore's technological strength does not come from facilities or capital. It comes from their history and spirit. This is an inimitable competitive advantage. Denmark must never abandon this partner. The Prime Minister finished reading the report and looked at me. Jensen, you seem completely captivated by Singapore. I answered honestly. More than captivated, I am awed, Prime Minister. It is this awe that we need. We too must learn. The Prime Minister nodded. This Singaporean anomaly wasn't built in a day. It is the accumulation of decades, even centuries, of hardship. Technology forged from such material is shaking the world. And we, Denmark, have decided to stand on the side of this anomaly. This is the right choice. I was deeply convinced. A good sword is born in the furnace, and Singapore, that furnace, is still constantly spewing sparks. Finally, negotiations began. The location, the main conference room of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Copenhagen. This was the first time delegations from Denmark, Singapore, and the United States sat face to face at the same table. The air in the conference room was heavy, thick like lead. The air conditioning was running, but the biting tension was far stronger. The U.S. representative, Tyler Ford, was in his 50s, with sharp eyes and thin lips, a typical Washington bureaucrat impression. Leading the Singaporean team was Deputy Secretary Lim. His expression, as always, was like a mask. Nothing could be read from it. Our stance was clear. The U.S. should not obstruct cooperation between Denmark and Singapore. But the U.S. had other ideas. On the first day of negotiations, the U.S. first laid its cards on the table. Officer Ford slapped a stack of documents onto the table. We acknowledge Singapore's technological prowess, but the Arctic Circle requires U.S. involvement because this is a security issue. I thought, security issue? Ultimately, it's just wanting to muscle in. Ford continued, Singapore must transfer its core technology to the United States. Denmark must share infrastructure operating rights with the United States. This is our proposal. In short, hand over your technology, hand over your rights. A minute of silence. Then, after about 30 seconds, Deputy Secretary Lim slowly spoke. Officer Ford, I want to confirm something. The sequence of your proposal just now seems a bit off. Ford's eyebrow twitched. Sequence? Deputy Secretary Lim calmly said. In negotiations, if one has a request, one should first offer something. However, the United States is asking Singapore to provide technology, yet offering an open market as compensation. But isn't that market already open through free trade agreements? The conference room was silent. Deputy Secretary Lim continued, Frankly, this is not an exchange. This is merely information sharing. This is not a negotiation. The sequence is wrong. Ford's face flushed with anger. However, Deputy Secretary Lim had not insulted him. He had merely disarmed him with logic. Negotiations were postponed to the second day. The U.S. proposed an amendment relaxing conditions, but the essence remained unchanged. Deputy Secretary Lim shook his head. Minister, please allow me to clearly state our position. He placed a document on the table. This is the official opinion of the Singaporean government. Technology can be sold, but dignity is not for sale. A heavy silence hung over the conference room. What we seek is an equal partnership, Unilateral concesiones are imposible. We are not here to beg. Ford's face was ashen. Are you saying you will abandon your relationship with the United States? Deputy Secretary Lim smiled, a cool, faint, ethereal smile. No, we just want to get the sequence right. If the United States sincerely desires cooperation, it must first acknowledge Singapore as an equal partner. The discussion began from that point. I felt a chill run down my spine. Ladies and gentlemen, do you understand? Singapore was lecturing the United States, telling the world's most powerful nation, "Don't you know the basic principles of negotiation? Follow the rules." This was simply insane. Yet, it was also entirely rational, because Singapore had the credentials. They possessed the technology the US desperately desired. The tables had turned. On the third day of negotiations, Singapore presented its final terms. Deputy Secretary Lim pulled out a final stack of documents. All clauses were clearly organized. These are the Singaporean government's final negotiation terms. The core content had 2 points. First, safeguarding technological originality. All original patents and intellectual property for technology provided by Singapore belong to Singapore. No third-party country shall reproduce or transfer them without authorization. Second, explicit stipulation of infrastructure autonomy. The operating rights for infrastructure built in Greenland shall be jointly owned by a consortium of Denmark and Singapore. Intervention by a third country is only possible with the consent of both nations. Ford stared at the document. Wait, does this clause effectively mean excluding the United States? Deputy Secretary Lim replied, "It's not exclusion. It requires a consent process. If the United States wishes to participate, it must obtain the consent of both Denmark and Singapore. This is a fair process." Ford's face contorted, but he had no logical rebuttal, for Deputy Secretary Lim's words were not wrong. However, the real bombshell was in the latter half of the document. The US legal team carefully reviewed the document and discovered a piece of information. Their faces turned pale. Ford urgently said, "Hold on, what is this clause? Article 12, paragraph 3? Deputy Secretary Lim smiled. "Which clause?" "Here. If the cooperating party violates the agreement, Singapore may withdraw from this agreement within 90 days after prior notice." "What does this mean?" Deputy Secretary Lim calmly replied, "The literal meaning. If the other party doesn't abide by its promises, we can withdraw at any time." Ford raised his voice. "This is unacceptable. If Singapore unilaterally withdraws, the entire project will collapse." Deputy Secretary Lim's gaze turned icy. "So, just abide by your promises. It's very simple, isn't it?" The room fell silent. In that instant, I had an epiphany. Singapore had secured an exit strategy from the very beginning. They had built a structure where they could disengage at any time. Even if they stepped into this agreement, even if the US exerted pressure, it didn't matter. Singapore could just leave, and the problem would be solved. Conversely, the more pressure, the more advantageous it was for Singapore. Because if the Greenland project collapsed, the biggest loser would be the United States. What kind of people were these? At the negotiation table, they rendered their opponents completely immobile. The US delegation requested an emergency recess. They walked into another conference room and closed the door. Although what they were arguing about inside was unclear, loud voices could be heard in the hallway. I approached Deputy Secretary Lim. "This is incredible. You've cornered the United States." Deputy Secretary Lim shook his head. "Not cornered, Officer Jensen. I merely stated the facts. In negotiations, what's most important isn't technology or money, but attitude. Clearly knowing what you want and being able to state it honorably. Singapore possesses this attitude." I nodded. Deputy Secretary Lim continued. "The United States has historically dominated the negotiation table because it possessed what its opponents needed. But this time is different. Singapore possesses what the United States needs. The situation has been reversed." I felt the weight of his words. Singapore was not sitting at the negotiation table. They were sitting on a throne of choice. Not negotiating, but choosing. Choosing with whom to cooperate. Choosing what terms to accept. This was true power. 2 hours later, the US delegation returned. Ford's face was still ashen, but his gaze had changed. It was an expression mixed with exhaustion and concession. He began, "We are willing to revise and discuss Singapore's terms. The right to withdraw under Article 12, paragraph 3, can be retained, But could the advance notice period be extended from 90 days to 180 days? Deputy Secretary Lim thought for a moment, then nodded. Then let's set it at 150 days. A middle ground. Ford sighed deeply. All right. The negotiations concluded at that moment. I witnessed this scene, falling into a strange thought. The world's most powerful nation, the United States, conceding to an island nation of just over 5 million people, Singapore. This was an unimaginable sight, but technology, this weapon, made it possible. After the negotiations, I spoke with Deputy Secretary Lim for a while. Today was truly impressive. I had no idea Singapore's negotiation skills were so strong. Deputy Secretary Lim smiled. Officer Jensen, this isn't negotiation skill. This is the result of preparation. Singapore has been preparing for this moment for decades, developing technology, fostering competitiveness, all so that one day they could speak honorably at the negotiation table. Today is merely the payoff for that preparation. I nodded. Singapore did not become strong overnight. They ran relentlessly for decades, gritting their teeth. Finally, they stood where they wanted to stand, a position even the United States could not ignore. Technology is power, and power has changed Singapore. It is no longer a nation that asks. It has become a nation that chooses. I looked out the window. Copenhagen's sunset burned red. A new era was about to begin, and one of the protagonists of this era was Singapore. The day of the agreement signing. I woke up early, my heart pounding. In Christiansborg Palace's Grand Banquet Hall, one of Denmark's most important international agreements in history was about to be signed. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the chandeliers. Centuries of history within the palace were now welcoming new history. The Singaporean delegation arrived, and I greeted them at the entrance. Deputy Secretary Lim extended his hand, grasping mine. It's been a long journey, Officer Jensen. I nodded. Indeed. The first time I heard the name Singapore, I never imagined this day would come. Before the signing ceremony began, the Singaporean side presented a small gift, a framed document. At first, I didn't know what it was. Deputy Secretary Lim explained, "This is a memo left by a young engineer from our technical team. It was written in the early stages of the project. We had it framed. We wanted to give it to you." I took the framed document and read its content. It was in English, with Chinese translation next to it. This is not just technology development. This is survival design. If the system we build fails, someone will shiver in the cold. Someone will spend the night in darkness. So we cannot fail, not even once. I read these words, feeling my breath catch. A young engineer's memo was not a lofty speech. It was a vow spoken to himself. Yet, within that vow lay the core of Singaporean technology, survival design. This was their mentality. They did not view technology as a means to make money or gain advantage, but as a tool to save lives. I asked Deputy Secretary Lim, "Where is this engineer now?" Deputy Secretary Lim smiled. "In Greenland. He's supervising the installation work on site. He said he wanted to see his designed system working correctly with his own eyes." I held the framed document to my chest. I will cherish this for life. After the signing ceremony, a press conference was held. Not only Danish media but journalists from all over the world gathered. Questions came in a torrent. A Danish journalist asked me, "Officer Jensen, how would you describe Singapore's technology?" I hesitated. How should I answer? In terms of numbers? Performance? Efficiency? No, none of that was the core. I spoke into the microphone. The core of Singaporean technology is not strategy, but attitude. The journalists looked at each other. I continued to explain. Strategy comes from calculation. If it's profitable, do it. If it's a loss, don't. But attitude is different. It's doing something because it's the right thing to do. In the Greenland project, Singapore never prioritized its own national interest first. They first asked the local residents what they needed, and then designed technology towards fulfilling those needs. Is this strategy? No, this is attitude. The journalists began typing. I continued. I have worked in diplomacy for decades, seen countless negotiations, dealt with countless countries. Most countries act for their national interest. This is a natural, fundamental aspect of international relations. But Singapore is different. Alongside interest, they leave behind trust. This is the true power I see in Singapore. The press conference fell silent. In that silence, I felt the weight of my words. Days later, an interesting analysis appeared in the US. A renowned think tank in Washington published a report on the Greenland project. I obtained this report and read it. Most of the content was predictable. Geopolitical risks, economic impact, military variables. However, my gaze stopped at the conclusion. In this project, Singapore did not demand territory, nor did they demand exclusive resource rights. They left behind only one thing: trust. This is a phenomenon that traditional geopolitical analysis cannot explain. Singapore is exerting a new type of influence. We call it technology without desire. Technology without desire. I repeated this phrase. It's not easy for American analysts to praise a competitor. This meant they had to admit it. The last sentence of the report was particularly striking. This country does not want land. They leave behind trust. And this trust might last longer than any land. As I reread these words, I nodded. Indeed, great powers always pursue land, territory, resources, military bases, tangible things. But Singapore is different. They leave behind intangible things, an asset called trust. And this asset is more powerful than any military force. About a week after the signing ceremony, I had dinner with the Singaporean business delegation. As the dinner concluded, the representative of the Singaporean consortium approached me. A man in his early 60s, with deep laugh lines etched around his eyes, the face of a man who had battled in the business world for decades. The representative spoke quietly. "Officer Jensen, I want to tell you something, please." He put down his glass and began. "Our company has a motto. We make axes, but we don't use them." I carefully considered the meaning of this sentence. Make axes, but don't use them? The representative continued to explain. An axe can be a weapon, or it can be a tool. It can hurt others, or it can help others. We are craftsmen who make axes, with the best technology and the best quality. But we will not use that axe to threaten people. Our axe is for cutting trees, building houses, chopping firewood to warm people's lives. I nodded profoundly. The representative continued. Singapore is a small island nation, caught between great powers. We know we cannot win by force. So we found another way, using technology, this axe. Not to threaten opponents, but to help them. This is our path to survival. I was deeply moved by his words. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the philosophy of this nation, Singapore, possessing technology that could be a weapon, yet choosing not to use it as one. Replacing threat with help, coercion with cooperation. This is Singapore's diplomacy and their strategy for survival. After dinner, I drove home, gazing out at the night view. Copenhagen's cityscape flowed by old buildings, narrow streets, streetlights reflected in the canals. This was the city where I grew up. I thought, Denmark is also a small country, with a population of 6 million. We always walk a tightrope between great powers. Perhaps we in Singapore share similar experiences. Precisely for this reason, we can resonate more deeply. The path Singapore has chosen, to survive with technology, to ally with trust, to extend a hand without desire. This is also a strategy for small nations to survive. That night, I wrote in my diary, "Today, I learned from Singapore that true strength does not come from harming others, but from a hand that protects others." Singapore's technology is precisely such a hand. The next morning, I arrived at the office and took out the framed memo, the young engineer's memo. This is survival design. I reread the sentence. Then, next to it, I added my own thought. This is also the coordinates of the soul. Singapore showed us not just technology. They left us with a new set of coordinates on how to act in international relations, how to use technology, and how small nations can maintain their dignity. Technology without desire, power without threat, diplomacy that leaves trust. This is the new paradigm Singapore is proposing to the world. I looked out the window. Copenhagen's winter sky was clear. Far to the north was Greenland. Singaporean engineers must be working there now, on the glaciers, in the -40-degree cold, silently installing systems. They are not heroes, nor do they consider themselves heroes. They are simply people carrying out their work. But their work is changing the world. I remembered never begging. These were not my words. These were the words of Singapore's history. In the post-war era of receiving aid, in the days of wavering between great powers, Singaporeans gritted their teeth and made a vow. That vow created the Singapore of today. And the Singapore of today is changing the world's coordinates. As a Danish diplomat, I have encountered countless nations. But no nation has moved me as deeply as Singapore. They gave us not just technology, they gave us hope, the hope that even a small nation can stand tall and proud. Outside the window, snow began to fall, white flakes drifting slowly. Farther north, in Greenland, it must be snowing too, on the glaciers, on the newly built facilities, and on the shoulders of the Singaporean engineers working there. But they will be all right, because they have a history of enduring the cold, because they have memories of lighting kerosene lamps in the darkness. I placed the framed document on my desk, so I could see those words every morning when I arrived at work. This is survival design. I will add one more sentence. This is also Singapore's gift to the world. A nation without tanks, without missiles, changing the world with only technology and trust.